All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Quill and Hammer. I am Trevor. This is Zach, my brother.
What's up, everybody?
So, Zach, today we're going to be continuing on with our discussion about the Harry Potter movies
Right.
and how we would fix them or improve on them, if you can call it fixing. I think we're talking about the Chamber of Secrets today, and I think they did a fantastic job. But we're going to discuss into it, delve, and see if there's anything we can do that would improve on that. But Zach, I want to start really quick. What was your impression of the Chamber of Secrets, the movie? What was your favorite part? What did they do really well? Can you think of anything off the top of your head that they didn't do?
Off the top of my head, there are a couple of things they chose not to focus on. Um, but they didn't miss any of the major story beats. The difficult thing with adapting a book to film is that you have to represent the story and choose which things to put in and which things to leave out. One
Right.
thing they chose to left out was Hermione stealing the supplies for the Polyjuice potion from Snape and the whole distraction that they caused in potions class to distract Snape, right? Was it absolutely necessary to show it? Probably not. Would it have been fun to see that played out on the screen? Yeah, absolutely. And so things like that, they like I said, they did a really good job representing the book. Um, So I don't know that I can find any faults with it, but there definitely are some different avenues that could have been taken to showcase different things. One thing they did really well is increasing the action sequences. You know, when Harry and Ron are on their way um to Hogwarts in the flying car, that whole sequence where Harry's about to fall out and get run over by the train and they're about to get hit by the train. None of that happens in the book, right?
Right.
But but it helps with the pacing of the film to keep things interesting during, the long opening sequence. Another instance is in the chamber when Harry's fighting the basilisk. Most of that action sequence doesn't exactly happen, but it makes it a lot more suspenseful. It makes it more, I guess suspenseful is the word, but they increase the action, increase the spectacle very well. But again, that was a creative choice and it didn't need to be done. So maybe those are some of the things that we can talk about as some different creative choices in the Chamber of Secrets film.
Right. No, I am with you. One, I think they did a really, really good job of representing the film, like you said, or the book in the film, like you said. And most of the stuff that I have are little nitpicky things and a little bit of, artistic license for how you're representing it and the lens that they are putting everything through. Uh, to begin with, and this is something that I feel they did a worse and worse job of as the films went on, but I feel like it starts in this movie is kind of reducing Ron's role to the comedic butt of the joke.
Right.
And you kind of forget that Ron is, a really loyal friend, and he's not an idiot. He's
No.
not, Hermione smart or book smart, but he knows a lot about the wizarding world, and he helps to bridge the gap between Harry and the wizarding world, Harry and Hermione, like, and in the movies, and it gets worse and worse. He becomes the comedic element,
Right.
and you miss the essential role that he plays in the trio, and it essentially becomes Harry lucking into things and Hermione solving most of the problems, and then Ron
Right.
just there.
So what would you do to fix that?
Well,
Starting in the Chamber of Secrets. What
start.
what specific things bothered you and how would you fix them?
So I want to go back to the the car scene. The They go back, they get in the car, and they are flying the car to Hogwarts. And like you said, they extend that and they make that, action-packed and really good and whatever. But but then they make him be the, butt of the joke. And so he's making weird faces, and then he's a bumbling fool, and it just doesn't seem to work for me. He
Right.
is, it's like I can see the face that he makes when when the train is right behind him and they go down onto the tracks and then you hear the train and then he looks over and it's just this like, I'm a pansy face.
Hmm.
And that's not who Ron is in the
Right.
books. And that scene in particular starts off uh the shift because if you remember in the first one, in Sorcerer's Stone, there he is. He is the brave guy going around and just stomping, McGonagall's chessboard at the end.
Hmm.
And then he willingly sacrifices himself, knowing that he is going to get hit hard by the queen. Like
Hmm.
that's him. He's brave. He has, a practical side to him. And then you step away from that moving forward because you need some comedy or levity at places, but you can do that without necessarily destroying and I won't even say it, they destroyed it here, destroyed his character here, but they set him on a path to be less and less moving forward.
Right. They took the first steps into degrading his character.
Right. And on that note, if you remember when they find Riddle's diary and they're looking at it, Ron is the one who recognizes the name because they got detention and he had to go in and polish trophies in the book with Filch. And I get that like you can't necessarily put all of that in there, but like, he's the one who recognized the name Tom Riddle and that 50 years ago he got special, an award for special whatever to the school
Right.
and just did some really, really cool things. But you miss that, and all you get is the comedy.
Right.
But but the thing is, and going back to the comedy, there are things in there that J.K. Rowling did that could be fun, comedic elements. Like, do you remember Lockhart, like how idiotic he
Hmm.
is?
Hmm.
They showed his first class, where he brings out the Cornish pixies
Right.
and sets them free and can't deal with them. And so he runs out and it's, Harry, Ron, and Hermione trying to put them back together and all of that.
Right.
Well, like you could have shown the absolute buffoonery that would have been his classes for the entire year. Like
Right.
there is a specific moment in the books where Harry is describing, or they're describing, Lockhart's class,
Hmm.
and all it is Lockhart reading sections of the book and making Harry act out parts.
Oh, yeah,
Like, tell
that's
me that wouldn't
right.
be funny, like to have seen, and it would have preserved all of the characters' core strengths,
Right.
but shown the absolute tomfoolery that happens when incompetent people are teachers.
Right.
But I don't know what, sorry, I've been dominating a little bit. What are your thoughts? Do you have anything to add to that particular point?
No, I think you're right. The problem I think they run into is you have so much to show, and to keep things moving, you have to focus the comedy onto someone who's always on screen, which happened to be Ron.
Right,
And it really was a detriment to his character. He's not a coward. He's brave. He is smart in his own way. He doesn't care as much about books and classes as Hermione does. That doesn't make him an idiot
right.
any more than Harry's an idiot, you know. Um, but yeah, you're right. You could have completely used Lockhart as all the comedic timing. I think about all the instances in the book when he takes Harry aside and misunderstands the situation, thinking that Harry's trying to boost his fame to be on par with Lockhart, and just the taking Harry under his wing type attitude that is just so funny in the books. That would have been a more apt comedic relief than denigrating Ron.
Right. Because you already have the butt of the joke there,
Right,
and you just don't utilize it as much. And I get like, you have to make certain creative choices. It's not like you can go through chapter by chapter, line by line, and just, you know, act it
act
out
it
and use
out.
that as a script. And so you have to choose things, and then, the editing process. There are scenes that were filmed and outtakes and things that just didn't make the cut for one reason or another, and whether that's time or I don't know. But at the time, they do the best they can with what they have and the
Right.
parameters that they have to fit. But I would have chosen if I were, you know, Chris Columbus, I would have chosen to focus on making Lockhart the idiot because he is. He's an idiot.
Right.
And you see him bumbling around the entire movie, and then at the end you see who he truly is.
Right.
And Ron's wand, which again, not his fault, is is, the tool that saves them.
Right.
And I don't know, it's just I would have focused on that. And they do to a certain extent make him, the idiot, but you could have done it more and saved the situation.
When I think, as I'm thinking about it, I think maybe one of the reasons why they fell into the trap of making Ron look like an idiot is because he does have his broken wand, and nothing goes right for him when he's spell casting in the book, but they sort of shifted the focus of that away from, yeah, his wand is broken, to, well, he's just kind of a Neville character, just kind of a bumbling idiot, just like Lockhart, but he's part of the trio, so we'll keep him around and make him the comedic relief. Instead of making it, yeah, he's a more than adequate wizard. It's just he's got a crappy wand that's broken.
Right. And I guess, we're not trying to take anything away from Ron. He can be funny. There are funny elements. Harry can make a joke. Ron can make jokes. It's the way that you frame it, you know? It's
Exactly.
like Ron can be the comedic timing without being the idiot. Just like I'm trying to think which which movie it's in. I can't remember off the top of my head, but where they're all talking and Hermione is like explaining what someone is feeling. Maybe it's Cho Chang in book 5 or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
And and Ron says no one could feel all of that. They'd explode. And Hermione says, "Well, just because you've got the, emotional range of a teaspoon, like,
Hmm.
it's just like a little funny thing." And they just laugh and joke about it, but it's not denigrating. It's just a funny thing, you know?
Right. Right.
So that's the thing I would have changed a little bit, but there is one thing that I wish, switching gears from Ron and moving to another Weasley. I wish they would have shown just a little bit more of Ginny in the book or in the movie because
Right.
really you see her at the Burrow and at the beginning, and then the only time you ever see her again is when she's in the Chamber of Secrets, you know?
Right.
And really throughout the entire book, you have little hints of, you know, Ginny's looking tired or stressed
Hmm.
or not sleeping well, and they blame it on the situation, not realizing that she's being possessed by the book, by the
Right.
diary, And there are just funny little things like you could have had the whole Valentine's Day stuff. Do you remember that Lockhart
Yes. Yes.
and the poem that Ginny wrote about Harry and the
Right.
gnome sings it or whatever, like stuff like that would have been funny and you could add her in and kind of see all of the things, but and at one point Ginny is trying to confess to being possessed, like it's her, but she wants to tell Harry,
Hmm.
but then Percy shows up and
Right.
it's those little things that had you added in would have been, I mean, it would have led a little bit more into the story and rounded out the clues and everything
Right.
because you really have no idea what's going on until you get down there. You don't know. I mean, put yourself in the position of someone who's never read the books. It's like, okay, you have no idea who the heir of Slytherin is. There are no clues. And, the only person that you even suspect is Malfoy. And then you have the scene where they sneak into Slytherin's common room and Malfoy, admits he's not the heir of Slytherin, and then
Hmm.
that's it. And then the next thing you know, they're taking Hagrid away, and it's like, well, we know Hagrid wasn't, the person. He
Right.
wasn't the heir of Slytherin. Of course not. You love Hagrid.
Hmm.
And then it's like, oh, by the way, Ginny was possessed.
Right.
But
It's
like,
kind of abrupt.
yeah,
It's like if you didn't read the books, you almost forget about Ginny during the entire middle of the film from when you get to Hogwarts until there she is in the chamber, and it doesn't make any sense. And I remember I was probably what, like 8 years old when it came out. I don't know, something like that. And I remember I hadn't read the book and I kind of just thought, oh, well, it just took Ginny just 'cause. It just that's who the victim was. Doesn't matter. It was just happened to be Ginny because it's important to Ron,
right.
you know. And sure, maybe my powers of observation weren't quite honed as they are now when I was merely 10 years old.
I
But
mean, Zeke, you're cutting yourself short. I
well,
mean, yeah, 10-year-old Zeke was a very observant man,
you're dang right I was. I was sharp. No,
as
but
attacked.
as attack. But but I think you're right. It's kind of like, well, why did it pick Ginny? And yeah, maybe you find out it's like retrospectively, um, Riddle explains that Ginny had been possessed by the book all year and blah blah blah, um, but you miss those clues, like the killing of the chickens and all that sort of stuff, But anyway,
Right.
I'm going on a tangent here.
Well, not really. I think that is the point of the book, or not the book, but that's one of the main themes, underlying themes and clues of the book is like you have no idea what's going on, and it has to connect back to Voldemort. It has to, and you find a little bit about who Tom Riddle is, and of course, things are happening and Ginny's the one doing the stuff, like, but she's being possessed. There are all sorts of little clues, and then you completely you know, miss the fact that uh, it's Lucius trying to discredit the Weasleys and get rid of Dumbledore all at once, and like
Right.
you kind of get a little bit of that when Lucius goes to Hagrid's hut, but like
Right.
you miss the nuance of it. And again, not that you can put all of that in there. I'm not saying we should have had more with Lucius Malfoy and everything throughout and little hints there. Yeah, I don't care about that, but I do wish we had had more than, you know, the diary is given to Ginny and you see that in Flourish and Blots and then there she is in the chamber.
Right. Um, Taking a step away from Ginny Weasley, one thing that I noticed is Fred and George, their role in the films also kind of started to decrease. And, I think it's another problem with you have too many characters and too much to adapt to the film and a limited runtime.
Right.
But you you wouldn't get the sense of loyalty that Fred and George have for Harry in the films as they do in the book. Um, if you remember, it wasn't Hermione who destroyed the bludger in the book, when it's going after Harry. It was Fred and George.
Right.
Fred and George spent the entire match protecting Harry from the rogue bludger. And finally, when Harry catches the snitch, they're able to bat it out of the arena, right? Out of off the pitch. And when a timeout is called, Fred and George are pissed at Wood for telling Harry to risk his life to catch the snitch in that game, and then I think about the scene after um it's announced, not announced, but after they find out that Ginny has been taken into the chamber, there's a scene where Fred, George, Ron, and Harry are sitting around the fire in the common room and they're just silent and mourning together, and it's like there's a camaraderie there with all of the Weasleys that just isn't quite illustrated in the films.
Right. No, I agree. And you know, even little things like somewhere in the book in one of the chapters when I think it was right after, the dueling club where people know Harry can speak Parseltongue and are thinking he's the heir of Slytherin, and you've got this whole, you know, it's like everyone except for the Gryffindors against Harry kind of thing.
Hmm.
And the Weasley twins, are making a joke out of it and
Right,
help Harry feel better. They're like, Make way for the heir of Slytherin," like,
right,
here he comes. Watch out," and just making light of it to make Harry feel better. And it does in the book. He says at least someone doesn't believe that he's the heir, like
right,
you
right.
miss the little things like that. And I feel like it's just such a small thing to add in there. It wouldn't have taken long.
Hmm.
But then again, timing constraints and filming and all of that, and I don't know. But it would have been fun to see a little bit more of that.
And I and on top of that, this is kind of getting into later books, later films, but the same kind of idea with Percy Weasley. You have his ambition take over and he betrays the family so that he can climb the ladder in the Ministry of Magic, and that isn't really shown in the films either, and it's a source of like a lot of stress and tension, especially for Molly Weasley.
Right.
But anyway, but again, I'm kind of getting on a tangent, but you miss the relationships within the Weasley family that Harry forges in these films because they just choose not to focus on it, and I think again that starts here in the Chamber of Secrets.
It does. And to be fair, again, we both love this book and this movie and this series, but and we recognize these first two books are we're really nitpicking because they were done really well.
Right,
But this kind of sets the foundation, and even though you can't film much of it, or you can't film everything and include every little thing, and you need to cut some stuff out and you have to choose. I wish they would have kept a little bit of that camaraderie in. And then especially as you move into the later books, just a little bit of that to keep it grounded. And like we said, as as the comedic timing, there are things in there that can be done that, would fix things.
right,
You don't have to necessarily make Ron the butt of the joke when you have the two jokesters literally there all the time.
right,
And that's one of their things. They are the jokesters. They open up, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, that like they they're, geniuses in their own right, but they don't care about books or school or anything. You
right,
know, they just want to do what they want to do and invent stuff and be fun and all of that. So
right,
having that in there would have been a lot more interesting, and it would have fixed things like the um comedy thing. And especially as you get into later books, later movies, they get increasingly darker as you go along. And
hmm
that's the nature of the series. It gets serious, far faster, and you have so much more content in each book, excuse me, moving forward, that you have to make those decisions. And so instead of just being, a light-ish like the Sorcerer's Stone was, and then we move into the Chamber of Secrets and it's not that bad. And but as you get going more and more, it gets darker and darker. But that's why you need the balance of these characters and these relationships that Harry is forging, because that's what brings the levity and brings the tone down a little bit more so the darkness doesn't get overwhelming, and you're not ruining the character's core being, I guess.
right. No, I totally agree.
But let's shift gears again. We've kind of talked about that. This is just something that I was wondering and wanted your opinion on, because it just hit me watching this and preparing for it that, like, Harry wears glasses all the time, right?
hmm
So hypothetically, if you wear glasses and you look into the basilisk's eyes, do you die or do you freeze? Are you petrified?
Dude, I think you're cooked. You wear glasses, there's no hope for you.
Why is that?
You, well, because if you're talking about, what were the reasons why people were petrified. Hermione had the mirror.
Uh-huh.
um, Justin saw it through nearly headless Nick. Mrs. Norris saw the reflection. Right. So you have two reflections and the light passing through a ghost, and I'll say it gets distorted there. But you're looking at an image rather than the light that's coming off the actual object,
But
right?
but what about Colin Creevey looking through his camera?
Well, let me think about that for a minute.
Because what is a camera and the zoom other than a magnifying glass?
Okay, well, that one I'm going to chalk up to world building. a world building error because I think that should I don't know. I can't tell you why that doesn't kill him, but glasses definitely aren't enough to change it. You know, glasses aren't enough to protect you from the gaze of the basilisk. And I don't know why, but it's like if you see it through a window, I think you're still cooked. You know, you don't have a chance. But but why the camera? I'm trying to think of a reason why that would. I don't know. I don't know. It's an old-timey camera because technology doesn't work around magic. Can you think of a rationale why?
I I can't. I cannot think of a rationale. That's why I asked because I've never questioned it before. But like it's either the reflection or I mean you look through, nearly headless Nick, that's whatever it's called, a gray area. A ghostly
A
gray
ghostly
area.
gray area. Oh gosh.
But you don't I never really thought about it, but that's the one that I keep coming back to is Colin was looking through, essentially a lens. Harry has lenses to correct his vision.
I guess I don't know enough about cameras to be able to make an educated guess. I mean, the mechanism, I have no idea. It's a world building error.
It must
That's all I'll
be
say.
because I mean that's not to say that the danger to Harry isn't real or if you did catch it through glasses like you would still be petrified,
Right.
but so it's like it's not like that gives Harry the excuse to look into the basilisk's eyes or whatever, but
I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Maybe I'll try and have an answer for you next week.
all right. And
I
this is one of those things if you're listening, like we want you to weigh in on this because we have no idea. I don't know if anyone has ever thought of that before. I haven't tuned into the Harry Potter world enough to know, the Harry Potter fan community to know whether that was a real discussion or not. But let's start it if it's not. What would happen? You know, if Zach is sitting there looking in the basilisk's eyes, he dies. But are my glasses, is my prescription enough to save me? Or are
oh,
we
I don't know.
both dead?
Your eyes do suck pretty bad. Maybe there's enough distortion that it wouldn't kill you.
Right? And then, what about contacts or sunglasses? Not that anyone wears sunglasses, but like how far does it go?
Yeah, let's see if we can get a discussion going
Yeah.
because I want an answer to that too.
I want to know. I want to know what people think. But let's go to let's that was a tangent and let's move back on. But I really wanted to talk about the one thing that bothers me the most
Okay.
when they're in and this is the one thing that I just can't get over. But when they are in the Chamber of Secrets and Fox comes down and blinds the basilisk,
Right.
right? In the book, Tom Riddle says, you know, you may have blinded it, but the snake can still smell you.
Hmm.
Do snakes have ears? He can still hear you. And it's like, that just bothers me. It bothers me so much. It's a nitpicky thing, but every time I watch the movie, I just, I can't get over it, Zach.
Well, there's an easy answer as to why they did it, and it's because if you were faithful and said it can still smell you, you wouldn't have had that super intense moment where Harry's in the I guess
Right.
sewage drain and the basilisk gets like this close to his face and you see the jaws open and he tosses the rock, right? That was completely not in the book
Right.
because he would have been done. He would have been gone. But
He would have been.
so I'm with you. It's nitpicky, but you have to add in some action somewhere. The action sequence in the chamber wasn't very long in the book. It was the the Phoenix comes down, blinds the basilisk, and then Harry gets the sword and stabs it. And that's about it, right?
Right.
But so it's a necessary evil, Trev. I would say it's a necessary evil to give some suspense and to give some action to the on-screen adaptation.
I guess it is. And I'm over here the part of me that wants to be as close to the book as possible is trying to think, is there any way they could have done something similar but with smell? And I can't think of anything. Like there's no way to like what are they gonna do? Have like there's nothing.
There's
So
nothing.
I guess you're right. I guess that's just me being, nitpicky about nothing, but
Now to be fair, I was nitpicky last week about the the Greek fellow versus the Irish fellow. I mean,
right.
it's I get the nitpickiness, but
Sometimes you just have something that it just sticks and you can't get it out of your head.
you can't.
And that's fine, but gosh, sometimes it just irks you even though it shouldn't,
But it does.
but it does. And then the other thing is and once again nitpicky is when Harry is he kills the basilisk. The fang goes into his arm. He's dying, and he hasn't stabbed the diary yet. So, in my mind, not in my mind, in the book, he is healed by Fox, and then Tom Riddle comes at him, and then Harry stabs the book. But in the movie, Harry stabs the book, and then Ginny wakes up and they talk a little bit, and then he's like, I'm gonna die. And then Fox comes over and heals him, I guess. And that's once again another nitpicky thing. It doesn't really matter, but I kind of wish they had reversed that just because I wanted to see maybe a little bit more of a duel between, Tom Riddle and Harry kind of fighting over the diary a little bit.
So do they have a magical duel in the book over the diary? I don't remember.
They don't, and that's something that I would have added in as a just a little bit of a whatever it's called, a little bit more panache, I guess,
Right. So
because
you would have extended the action to then have Riddle make a last ditch effort to keep Harry out
right,
when the venom from the basilisk fails. I get you.
right, right, and then it would have been because when you think about all the things that Harry does, the Chamber of Secrets is the like pinnacle of his like bravery almost. Not bravery,
Hmm.
I don't mean it that way because it's not like Harry isn't brave, but like every other time he does anything, it's Expelliarmus for the rest of his life.
Right.
But like here, he doesn't have a wand, he can't do anything. All he's got is a sword, so he kills a snake, you know?
Right.
He's embraced that he's gonna die, but you know, Fox comes and heals him. And then if I mean, like, even if it had been something like, Tom Riddle tries to summon the diary because Harry goes for it and he tries to like, I don't know, summon it to him and Harry dives on the book, or just something like that, I think
Hmm.
would have been a bit more satisfying to me.
Right. No, I get you. Um, because Riddle himself never really seems like a threat.
Right,
He's he's the snake charmer, not to be too cliche there, but he's the snake charmer, and then it's just that's it. He can't really do anything because he's still just a memory, right?
right.
Um, so yeah, I'm with you. I can get behind adding a little bit of danger from Riddle himself to the situation. Um, but what can you do?
What can you do? I mean, it is, like I said, nitpicky. It's something I would have added. I mean, just like you add the little scenes here and there. We talked about the car ride and the train and all of that, and we talked about a couple other things, but it's just something I would have added to extend that a little bit more to show that, Riddle was a threat, because I don't think you fully realize, other than him picking up the wand, but like he was almost reanimated.
Right, he was close.
He was close, and I don't know how that works, and you kind of don't have that real conversation in the movie, or
Hmm.
but like he was almost reanimated. He could pick up Harry's wand and perform magic.
Right,
And you kind of don't see that as a threat, but if you did, it would have added just a little tiny bit more, you know?
right.
But it's not like, you can pick and choose now what you do, and that wasn't even in the book, but it was just something that I thought would have added a little bit.
A different way to have a little bit of creative liberty and add tension to the situation.
Right. Now, this is, going back a little bit. What were your thoughts on the spiders?
I mean, it doesn't quite happen in the movie how it does in the book. Um, I think Harry and Ron and Fang get captured by some, I guess they're baby acromantulas,
Right.
and taken to Aragog, right? Instead of just following them and making it all the way there. And um, but I mean, for the most part, I think it's fine. I don't have any problems with the way that they handled that part of the film. But again, they extended the getaway sequence. None of that happens in the book. They just sort of get in the car and drive off.
Right.
But and so again, I'm fine with that. Maybe I would have added or I would have not added the action in that scene and done something else, like you said, with Riddle. Um, but the only other nitpick that I have is that it's another showcase of Ron's cowardice, which doesn't exist.
Right.
Um, and for that reason, I that would be my only change, I think, because yeah, he's terrified, but he still goes.
Right.
Highlight the fact that he's still going instead of just a whimpering, cowering coward.
Right. Well, not only does he goes with a broken wand,
Yeah.
and he is facing his biggest fear, to be with Harry.
Hmm.
And I mean, all you see is the whimpering buffoon, not, I am facing my fears and I am going to, stand by my friend. You just see the comedic, why couldn't it be follow the butterflies, you
Right.
know? Which again, I don't necessarily think that line is bad. I think it's funny,
Right.
but then it needs to be followed up with him bravely, you know, doing whatever. Show him kicking a spider or something, you
Hmm.
know?
Bravery and loyalty. That's what Ron's two core characteristics are, I would say.
Hmm.
Which is why in book four, it hurts so much when Ron gets upset and turns on Harry, is because he's been fiercely loyal for three whole books, and now something's changed, right?
Right. Same thing in
And
book
so,
seven. Same thing in book seven.
yep, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
it's like that's the defining characteristic, and that's why it hurts so much when he is, leaves a little bit,
But then he comes back
but then he
because
comes
he's
back
loyal.
because
He
he's
comes to
loyal
his
and he
senses.
always does. So I would have changed that. That's where I was going with the spiders thing.
Right.
But also, and once again, not to get into a tangent, and I'm sure when we, sometime in the future when we go through the books, we'll talk about this more, but when Tom Riddle discovers that Hagrid is the, you know, has a monster,
Right.
like I'm not wrong in saying like they could have figured out that like yeah, I don't think there are any spiders that can paralyze people, petrify people. Or I don't know.
Well,
Is there a discussion? I know like the consensus is okay, Hagrid was half giant and you don't specifically say that in the movie or the books up until book four, but Hagrid's half giant and he's, you know, kind of gruff and rough around the edges and always trying to, wrestling werewolves or whatever. And
hmm
but like it seems like there is just an utter lack of any form of justice in the world, I guess.
why I agree. Um, and if I remember right, I don't think there were any students who were petrified when Riddle was letting the basilisk out, but Moaning Myrtle did die, right?
Right.
And it went through her glasses. She had glasses, so no, glasses confirmed, discussion over. Okay, but no, because why then does the camera not do it? Anyway, but so Myrtle dies, and I think that's the only thing that happened, right? Um
Well, I think they said I think in the diary when Harry is talking to Riddle or, when he asks about the Chamber of Secrets or something, I think it says like it started out the way it did before. Like
mm,
history repeats itself kind of thing. I could
gotcha.
be wrong, but
Okay.
I do think some people were paralyzed or petrified as well. And then it happens.
Okay, so if that's the case, then there's no, I mean it's just ridiculous, I guess, because like you said, an acromantula can't paralyze people. It's venomous
Right?
and isn't exactly a safe creature, but it's not able to petrify people, and so they should have said, okay, well, what was the monster? It was an acromantula. It's like, oh, well, guess it wasn't you then.
Right?
It's like it because that it's like there's no logic, and I think this is where we as fans start to look into things a little too deeply,
Uh-huh.
and we have to remember that J.K. Rowling wrote these as essentially stories for kids, right?
Right.
And they just became so beloved that now we're part of a ginormous fan base that wants everything to be logical and perfect and all this stuff. But in reality, this was only book two of a what was starting out to be a children's series. And so things don't quite always make sense, right?
Right.
She didn't plan for all of these questions. It was just, yeah, Hagrid was framed and he had his wand broken,
Right.
right? And that's as much as she cared about, really,
Right.
and but then these questions do arise. And another question is, well, why didn't they use Veritaserum on Hagrid and ask if he was the heir of Slytherin? And the answer is because J.K. Rowling hadn't thought up Veritaserum yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
But but so there's just some things that you have to overlook, I guess.
And and you're right. We are trying to retroactively apply things that she brought in future episodes in future books to previous ones when clearly she had no idea that she was going to put Veritaserum in book 4 when she wrote book 2.
Right.
And I will maybe not argue, but I think that is one of the biggest mistakes of the entire series is introducing Veritaserum
Yeah.
because because introducing that, then you are talking about, okay, well, why didn't you just use that on Hagrid?
Right.
Why not make everyone at Hogwarts take 3 drops of Veritaserum? You've got a potions master there. You can, do whatever you want. It's like, okay, people are being petrified, people are dying. We're just gonna make everyone take this truth potion. But
Hmm.
then again, that maybe, you probably couldn't get away with that even in our times, but like, but it's like, okay, well, Hagrid has been accused of trying to murder people.
Hmm.
Maybe we should give him a fair shake.
Right.
Same thing with Sirius. It's like
Right.
ask, yeah, he's been accused of murder, accused of being a traitor to wizard kind, you know, talk to him. Force
Right.
him to tell the truth. Force all of them to tell the truth.
I think if there's a way to justify the addition of Veritaserum, I would say it needs to be like there needs to be a consequence for drinking it. Like maybe you go insane. Maybe that's what happened instead of Neville's parents being tortured into madness with the Cruciatus curse. Maybe they were forced to take Veritaserum and it turns them into, like you can't function. Your higher order thinking is impaired or something, or you die. Maybe it's like something that serious that it's like, okay, well, we can't just give it to everybody because we can't kill these innocent people or we
Right,
can't make these innocent people go insane. I if you're going to introduce something that powerful that could have solved these problems, there also has to be an in-universe reason why you didn't.
right,
And I think maybe adding some very severe consequences to using Veritaserum would have made it
right,
okay. So it's like when they use it on um Barty Crouch Jr. when he's still polyjuiced to look like Alistair Moody. It's like, yeah, we need to know, and it doesn't matter that we're gonna, resign this guy to insanity.
right.
We got to know, you know. But I don't know. But I do agree. I don't think it was the best choice to add Veritaserum because it adds more problems than it fixes.
It it does. And it brings up the question of, it calls into question the Barty Crouch's, in book 4. his rise to power was, we're gonna be firm and we're gonna anyone who is deemed a traitor is gonna be a traitor or whatever. But like, why didn't you just do this one thing? Why did it
Right.
matter if you were gonna put them in Azkaban with the Dementors? Why not just kill them?
Right.
I mean, gosh, I don't want to talk about the death penalty versus life in prison because that is a very hard topic and people are divided on that. And I'm not saying we should kill them all, but it's like Dementors that's a worse fate than
Than
death
death.
to just have them sucked away into insanity.
Hmm.
Why not just kill them?
It's it's an interesting question. Um, and we can talk about all the additions in later books that caused problems for earlier books, but um, but the Veritaserum is a pretty glaring one. It would have solved a lot of problems. You you have Snape accusing Lupin of letting an old friend back into the castle.
Yeah,
Take some Veritaserum. Volunteer. Say, look, I'll take some Veritaserum and I'll tell you.
right.
It's like it would solve a lot of problems. There wouldn't be any trust issues. But
Right.
as soon as you introduce that, then it's like it's over,
It's over. You open up too big a can of worms to put it back. But I
Yeah,
agree. And that's kind of like what we're talking about with, reforging fiction is what could we have done to keep the books and the movies and everything the core of what they are, but maybe tie up a little bit of these inconsistencies or loose ends or whatever. It's
right,
like, had we been the author, knowing what we know now, we would say, okay, yeah, there needs to be a consequence
right,
to Veritaserum. It can't just be this get out of jail free card kind of situation where it's just like, oh yeah, they're forced to tell the truth.
like
Well,
okay,
okay, but you know, how do you, not use that some places, but use it here? Or, it's like in
right,
book five, granted, no one wanted to know the truth, but they bring Harry in to
right,
question him. It's like, okay, we're gonna make you take Veritaserum. We're gonna get to the bottom of this.
right,
Thinking that he's, absolutely wrong. And then it's like, oh, well, he can't lie because we just gave him this potion,
right.
and so you do need something. I agree. But anyway, that was a very big tangent. But going back to it, it's like how would you have framed Hagrid in a different way or in a more convincing way if you had to rewrite it? And maybe that'll be our final point here.
Hmm. Well, I think Riddle would have had to kill Aragog and I don't know, place some there would have needed to be more than just an accusation. There would have had to be some groundwork, some actual framing that happened,
Hmm.
kill or release the acromantula so that Hagrid doesn't have it to prove, which kind of happens, you see that in the movie, but have have I don't know, and I guess the sequence is so quick that it's kind of like it just it doesn't quite make for a good storytelling because everything just happens so quickly. But you would have to show Riddle taking some steps to frame him.
Right.
Saying, "Yeah, I left. I mean, chicken blood on Hagrid's clothes, or just something to frame um, Hagrid more, and then he needs to proactively get rid of the acromantula so
Right.
that when they question him, say, "What was the monster?" He's like, "I didn't have a monster. I had an acromantula." Then it's not like, "Oh, well, they don't do this, so I guess it's not you."
Right.
There needs to be some plausibility to it to say, well, um, Hagrid's lying. It wasn't an acromantula. It was something else, and here are the reasons why it's him. There's things connecting him to the crimes, right?
Right.
Instead of just he has an acromantula, so I guess it's him, you know.
Right. Well, now this would take some thought to really delve into and figure out how he would have done it. But if I remember right, Tom Riddle was a sixth year
Hmm.
in, when he was opening the Chamber of Secrets. And so he would already at that point canonically have killed his father and framed his uncle for the murder and
Right,
implanted a memory into his uncle's brain of him killing the Riddles.
right.
So, granted, this might cause more problems because Hagrid would have known. Like Hagrid knows that he was innocent and framed, and
Hmm.
you know, that's why he was expelled. But if Tom Riddle had been able to implant a memory into Hagrid's mind, maybe not very well, but enough to place like a doubt
Hmm.
that, like, was it an acromantula? Was it not? Like he didn't mean to, but this creature got out of control. Like, he is cunning enough that he could have done that
Right.
and could have laid the groundwork and then put this memory in that would be like, he's like, Hagrid, I know you didn't mean to, but a girl died or whatever, and it's if you put something in there that kind of, explains. And like I said, you'd need to kind of really think out the whole scenario.
Right.
But that could have been something where it's more believable than my word versus Hagrid. Hagrid could admit, like, there are times I didn't know where the monster was, and I don't
Right.
like I had a spider, but I don't know what happened to the spider. But it's like, well, was it really a spider?
Hmm.
Just little things that, you know, could have helped, but like you could also have shown that, like, yeah, well, Tom Riddle was still in school, and yeah, he was brilliant, but it wasn't a perfect memory implant, and you know,
Right.
Dumbledore saw through it a little bit, but not enough to, there wasn't enough evidence to really go against it, like
Right.
that kind of stuff, and you could have expanded that a bit. And I think the books, and I'll end with this. We were happy with a 700-800 page book when, book 5, 6, and 7 came out, right?
Hmm.
I think you could go back and add a lot of groundwork and things in for the future books into books 1, 2, and 3
Yeah.
and fix a lot of these problems. I say it retroactively because, you know, we know now what we know. But if you had gone back and said, hey, two idiots, two idiot brothers in 2025 are going to question these things,
Hmm.
you know, and talk about it. Let's fix it now. Like you could go back and you could do a lot of different things to bolster, you know, Voldemort and his, villaininess and I don't know, like all sorts of things, to
Right,
set up the future books when more and more stuff gets put in and you have to create more and more magical devices to, explain such an awesome world. And then you're kind of left wondering, okay, well, why, if this existed, didn't we use it here or here?
right,
And you could solve those problems in advance, and then we're not having this discussion.
right. And I think we've mentioned before, but we plan to go back and do the same sort of thing with the books. We plan to do that. And so when we get to that point, we can talk about how you would either take something out in a future book or put something in an earlier book to lay the groundwork, like you were saying. But those are topics to be explored for another day.
They are, and I think we've, kind of exhausted everything that I had about Chamber of Secrets, especially the movie. We started talking a little bit
Hmm.
more about, different things, but the movie, to recap, I thought they did a really good job, and most of our stuff was just nitpicky, except for the Ron,
Yes,
and not necessarily, it wasn't even that bad in this book, but it sets the stage for, or this movie, but sets the stage for the next six movies for Ron to really be the butt of the joke.
right.
But but gosh, I thought they did a fantastic job with these two. And then as more content, as the books get longer and as more content comes in, that's when the movies start to take a different turn that I would have gone with.
Right.
And so I think, starting with our next book, we're going to have a little bit more to talk about. Our next movie, the Prisoner of Azkaban, and then the Goblet of Fire, and moving forward, we're going to have a few more things that we can talk about that we would have fixed than these two, which are essentially almost perfect copies of the book plot, and, you know, I think really well done.
And and I agree, just to put my last word in, these two first films really did capture the tone of the books. They're supposed to be lighthearted, a little bit of suspense, a little bit of danger, but magical. And they were magical films.
Yeah,
And like we say, we nitpick and we say, well, they should have done this, they should have done that, but in reality, they did a fantastic job with these two films.
they did.
Um,
And I was going to say, dare I say magical, Zach?
dare
They
I
did a
say magical.
magical job.
They were magical. And not to say that the remaining films are inherently bad, but again, just due to time constraints, you have to leave things out. Even in book seven, where they split it into two films, you still have to leave things out because
Right.
there's just so much to cover. And so we'll get into it next week with The Prisoner of Azkaban. Make sure you guys tune in, leave some comments below about what you think you would have changed in the Chamber of Secrets, and if there are any other movies, books, video games that you would like to see us talk about, let us know in the comment.
Absolutely. We appreciate you all tuning in. We're Zach and Trevor. Zach, Trevor, And we appreciate you tuning in to Quill and Hammer, Reforging Fiction.
We'll see you next week.
Peace.